Okay, so welcome to Dragonflight Beta. Wanted to do a state of for Devastation. If you've never seen a state of before, it is a progressive series where I go over a class and or spec during an expansion, patches, just changes in general. And I have had a chance to play around with Devastation. I did the Invoker starting zone and um, been playing around with it here in Darnassus. Stormwind has far too many people, so I just came to Darnassus. Um, so I think I have a rough idea of what everything does. Um, so going to go over the abilities and the talents. Probably going to do two different videos instead of in lieu of one, as not to have one long uh, video. So here I'll go over the abilities, show you what they do, uh, the what they look like, all of that. So first, some pros and cons, kind of a overview of initial thoughts. So Invoker is a combination, I would say, of Shaman, Monk, and Demon Hunter. You could say it's a bit early since Demon Hunter is still a new class, although that has become the routine. Every two expansions, we get a different, we get a new class. However, you could make the argument this was a class that nobody knew about and nobody asked for. As far as the actual casting abilities, they seem very generic. They're not really mage, they're not really warlock. They just kind of do what you stereotypically would think they would do. The red ones do fire damage, the blue ones do frost, the green ones heal. Um, I will mention this because I kind of got not confused, but didn't quite understand what the purpose of it was, and I'm pretty sure it was mentioned during the Dragonflight trailer when they were talking about Invoker. So every spell, more or less, correlates to a color. Um, and from what I could tell, so that in the broad overview as it stands now doesn't mean anything. In fact, I see it as something they're going to, in an expansion or two, probably remove. Just give you your DPS, your AoE, your utilities, all of that. When I looked it up, what it's supposed to do, so I'm thinking maybe later on in the game, maybe end game, there's some speculation about exactly how Invoker is going to fit into retail as far as how they'll be introduced, what they'll have, and things like that. Um, Supposedly, if you increase a red ability, it's supposed to benefit all red abilities in some way. Um, so I'm not entirely sure, unless there's something more with the talents that I'm missing. Nothing really does that as of now. So unless they have a kind of like a class hall or something in Dragonflight somewhere that we haven't seen yet, um, it really is just kind of a flavor thing. It doesn't really do that much. So don't. I would say at this point, don't get too hung up on kind of what all the colors mean. Um, as far as the abilities go, um, so where the other classes come in is kind of with the flavor text on the abilities. So, Living Flame does damage and heals you. So very much how monks worked when they first started, or penance works if you're familiar with Discipline Priest. The mastery for um, Devastation is the opposite of Restoration Shaman, um, where your healing is based on the target's health. Your damage is based on the target's health. So, which I have to admit is actually kind of neat. to see kind of the opposite of a mastery effect, kind of how it would work in a somewhat similar class but different. So, if you go through the book here, you don't have too many abilities. They seem to have learned their lesson with Death Knight and Demon Hunter, not to make them too overpowered. You seem to have just enough, just kind of what you need. Maybe a spell or two, so you have some choices to make in combat, and that's pretty much it. I have to say, it wasn't. I was expecting it to be more overpowered than it was. I was a little disappointed, at least going through the Invoker starting zone. Um, it actually seems fairly balanced compared to Death Knight and Demon Hunter. Um, I I'm guessing PvP is going to be broken for a while because they have a ton of CC for some reason. Um, so that might end up suffering a little bit. You do have, or they do have, a Time Warp hero ability um, with Fury of the Aspects, which is kind of nice as somebody that did a lot of mythics during Shadowlands. It gives you another class besides Shaman, Mage, and Hunter, unless somebody has drums. Somebody is a leather worker and has drums. Um, and one that can heal and do DPS is also kind of nice. So I can see that being a benefit in group content. Aside from that, what I'm going to do, since I have everything on the bar, is just run through the abilities as I have them. So you do have a new resource, which is Essence. You don't generate it, it just regenerates itself. You only have 3 abilities that use it. Um, so the main rotation, it's not too different from any other class for the most part. So I imagine starting out, you're going to be either on par or maybe slightly overgeared, overpowered. And then as we get further to max level, things are going to get a little bit tougher, as usually is what happens when a new expansion comes out. So, as I said, I can imagine when we get to endgame, if people start gearing and things like that, and um, getting more used to what everything does and figuring out what everything does and all of that, I can imagine someone's going to um, set Invoker up to be just a pain in something. If not PvP, they're going to be overpowered in Mythics or something. It seems like most of the pieces are there. Um, so I'll be curious to see what people do with some of the different abilities, because some of the abilities seem like you kind of have to use them to fully understand what they do. Um, and hopefully that'll make sense as uh, we go through some of these. So the first one is Living Flame, which just does that. It's pretty standard ability. That's what it looks like when it's healing. So that just does single target damage. Your AoE is Azura Strike, which is an instant AoE, which is a little bit takes a little bit getting used to. I've got to admit, I'm used to AoE that you have to. Usually, AoE has a disadvantage, so you usually have to cast it in some way. Pyre is, from what I can tell, a um, kind of a filler ability. It uses 2 essence, does reasonable damage. It's not the most damage, your biggest damage ability, not by a long shot. But it just doesn't really fit into the rotation any other way, from what I can tell. Um, so and that's what that looks like. So it's kind of cool. Has a little bit of a cleave effect. Um, and then hover. So this is probably the first one that it's not really clear what the intent for this was. So all it does is you hover. That's literally it. So unless there's something on the floor, um, you can use most everything. You have one channeled ability. I don't believe it lets you use your channeled ability. Other than that, there's really no benefit to it. Yeah, launch yourself and gain 30% increased movement speed for 10 seconds. Allow invoker spells to be cast while moving. Does not affect empowered spells. So we'll get to that in a moment. So other than that, other than being in a raid and having AoE or something, I cannot see a point for this. To further confuse you with this, or to further show how strange an ability this is, you also have another. You have Blessing of the Bronze. So when I saw this and I saw the 60-minute duration, I thought it was a stats buff, so I was kind of excited. No. Reduces the cooldown of hover by 15%. So it is quite a strange, odd little ability. They seem like they really want you to use this, and I cannot figure out why. Because it has no benefit um, to your DPS, other than kind of making things instant cast. That's it. So again, kind of like I think it's Nature's Grace that shamans have that let them cast spells while moving. Mage had a spell that let them do the same thing. I can't remember specifically the name of it. They've moved it all around the old talent trees. I think it was a baseline ability for a while. Other than that, I can't see a point. So again, outside of raids, I really don't think it's going to be all that beneficial. Maybe in Mythics, haven't actually seen a dungeon yet to kind of gauge their difficulty. Now for the two big damage dealers you have. So Deep Breath is one, and you'll see a couple that have this new kind of target location marker. And there you go. So you will see that quite a bit. Does pretty good damage. Has a 2-minute cooldown, which is a bit wonky for trying to work it into a rotation. Going through the starting zone, as you might imagine, I was pulling things several times within 2 minutes. So you kind of have to pick and choose when you need to use it. Disintegrate is your channeled ability. So this is your kind of I-beam if you were a demon hunter. And that's what it does. You can use it at range, as you see. So, uses 3 essence, yes. Slows movement speed by 50%. So again, it's a frost ability, so it does what you would expect frost abilities to do. And then they have kind of a new type of ability, and it wasn't exactly clear how you use this. I actually had to go through the starting zone, and even there, it wasn't entirely clear. They didn't really explain it to you, but you were kind of in a situation where you could play around and figure it out. So the way this is described, it makes you think there's another ability, or at least something you have to do first. What you actually have to do is just hold the button down. And then it has levels, I'll say. And the longer you hold the button down, it'll bring up a bar. And as the bar kind of increases, you go from level 1 to 2, 3, 4, etc. And it's supposed to be a better spell. So it kind of lets you pick and choose. You won't always need to use the the level 4 of the spell. Sometimes you might just need a level 1, level 2, depending on what it is you're doing. Preservation has the same thing. Each spec has at least 2 for DPS and healing. So Fire Breath does damage. And the longer you hold it down, it shifts from overtime damage to instant damage. So it goes from 9,000 instant and 31 overtime to a max of 32 instant damage and 7 overtime. So if you see the bar there, it goes through its whole thing, you let it go, and there you go. So the way it's described, inhale, stoking your inner fire, think of how a dragon is supposed to be. Release to exhale. That was the part that was confusing. Burning enemies in a cone in front of you for 40,000 fire damage, which is, as I said, one of your bigger damage dealing abilities. It's more on par with, I guess it's half of Deep Breath and Disintegrate. Damage reduced, of course, beyond 5 targets. And then, of course, you have a fire spell. You have to have a frost spell. Focus your energies to release a salvo of pure magic, dealing 20,000 frost damage to the enemy. Damages additional enemies within 12 yards of the target when empowered. So if we were to do that, so there you go. So it goes from damaging 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. And then you have Tip of the Scales, which when you activate this, it goes to the max that the spell can do. Just makes it instant, so you don't have to hold the button down. So I'll be interested to see how people use these. I have a feeling there's going to be some misunderstanding about how they work or how you're supposed to use them. In DPS, it actually works rather well with the rotation because it's not on 30 seconds isn't a terribly long cooldown. So you can kind of use it as a filler when Deep Breath is on cooldown. And just kind of tailor it to what you need, which is kind of nice. Thinking from a healer perspective, sometimes you end up using a spell just because it's available and you're trying to keep the group alive in a particular, maybe an end of a fight or a weird mechanic part of a fight. And you kind of feel like you've wasted, your main goal is to heal without overhealing, because overhealing is wasted healing. So it's kind of the same thing with this. It lets you tailor what you need to each situation, which is kind of nice. I just wish they would have explained it in a different way, because it really took me. You're used to hitting a ability and letting it go. You're not used to having to hold it down. Even, like Disintegrate, it's a channeled ability. You hit it, it does, it channels on its own. So that took some getting used to. Once you figure that out, once you saw the bar, it also didn't help that they changed the UI. Because if you don't have that bar up there, and it's not up there by default, it actually hides behind your command bar. If you don't see that, you miss what it's doing the first time you try to use it. So, then from there, you have a couple of damage mitigation abilities. Renewing Blaze The flames of life surround you for 8 seconds. While this effect is active, 100% of damage you take is healed back over 8 seconds. So, again, kind of like Monk, I've noticed there's more of an emphasis on healing, which Havoc suffered with a lack of self-heal, even with soul fragments. Um, it was the one spec you really needed to have potions, ideally, or food or something. So I've noticed they've made more of an effort to give a more reliable, on-demand self-heal. So I'm glad to see that. And renewing Blaze, it could be very easily be a monk ability. Just change Blaze to Mist or something. Renewing Mist, I believe, is the spammable AOE, or not AOE, the heal over time. Um, so you can kind of see they took influence from different classes, which is kind of nice and also um, kind of leaves me undecided. Like I want to see more, like a little further along in Dragonflight, how how abilities end up really working out. And then Obsidian Scales reinforce your scales, reducing damage taken by 30% lasts for 12 seconds. So this reminds me of something like a tank would have. Kind of a mid-range mitigation. Um, 2 charges, so you can kind of use it in between, maybe your heal, or maybe your, whatever your other mitigation is that you're trying to keep up. There's usually a shorter one that you have to keep the buff up if you're a tank. Um, so 30%, pretty good. Like I said, somebody is going to, again, in PvP, it's almost. I keep thinking these Invoker is going to be just broken for, at least the start, because somebody is going to, start gearing up and start figuring out what all these different abilities do, and you're just not going to be able to kill them, is my thought. So, much past that, you have a couple actual healing abilities. You have Eternal Bloom, which is the AoE for preservation, which is a really weird AoE because it's not a on target. It just activates wherever you're standing, which for a healer is really weird because you're not generally in the middle. You're generally behind the rest of the group or off to the side. You're usually trying to stay out of the way. There's very few healers that will be in melee range. So it's kind of um, an odd ability for what it's supposed to be. Um, it does have a very nice effect. Reminds you of a druid. I think that's pretty self-evident. And then you have Fervent Embrace, which reminds me of an ability that monks had called Chi Step or Misstep or something like that, where you targeted a player, you targeted someone in your party, and when you used it, it would kind of teleport you to them, kind of blink you to the target, and it would heal them. And it was a really cool ability, and it was in the mid to later part of Warlords. I don't remember if it got added in during a patch or if it was in the whole game, because it seemed like towards the end, like every monk discovered it at the same time. No one used it. It was an overlooked ability, more or less, and then all of a sudden, everyone started using it, and then they took it away. I'm pretty sure before Battle for Azeroth, because everyone was disappointed. So that is what this does. But it's a bit misleading because if you use it, It will work um, without teleporting you anywhere. So it is your bigger single target heal. Um, if you do use it, it will work like other abilities in the game. Just kind of rushes you towards the target. You do have a counter spell, which is nice. Thinking about mythics, since I did a lot of mythics in Shadowlands during the various seasons, having a counter spell is, or a spell interrupt, counter spell, spell interrupt, same thing, is uh, more than worthwhile. So being able, and not all healers have them for some reason, so I was kind of surprised. So again, kind of gives you a different choice if you're trying to fill out your Mythic Plus group. Um, I know sometimes DPS kind of tunnels what they're doing, so as a healer, you're more focused on keeping people alive, maybe not so much on the fight. So you could be looking to interrupt a specific spell, providing you had a spell interrupt. I know with Hunter that was a big thing, like trying to watch to interrupt different spells and things like that. Again, haven't actually done any Dragonflight dungeons yet to know kind of difficulty if that's actually something you're going to need to kind of focus on necessarily. Um, and then I'm thinking this is supposed to be um, like a kind of a buff, temporary increase to your abilities. Um, Dragon Rage, interrupt the Dran- Draconic Fury, and exhale Pyres at 3 enemies within 25 yards. For 14 seconds, Essence Burst chance to occur is increased by 100%, and you gain the maximum benefit of Mastery. Giant Killer, regardless. Benefit of Mastery, Giant Killer, regardless of target's health. So I'm assuming it's supposed to be some kind of like a self buff. Let's see here. What is this? There you go. Yeah. So Essence Burst has a 100% chance to occur. Your spells gain the maximum benefit of Mastery. So there you go. And then of course, as I said, you have a hero ability there. And then for the racial abilities, which mainly seem focused for CC, you have Tail Swipe, lash out with your tail, knocking enemies within 8 yards into the air. So PvP, you can see that. Glide, reduce your falling speed. You can activate this with the jump key while falling. So again, think Demon Hunters, wings, same thing. Wing buffed. With a powerful flap of your wings, knock away enemies in front of you. So again, PvP kind of thunderstorm kind of effects. Landslide, conjuncture a path of shifting stone towards the target location, rooting enemies for 30 seconds. Damage may cancel this effect. So it works just like the there you go. Very very shaman like. And then opposing roar, let out a bone shattering roar at enemies in a cone in front of you, increasing the duration of crowd control that affect them by 50% in the next 10 seconds. And then, of course, you have a expunge. Being a healing class, you expunge toxins affecting an ally, removing all poison effects. And then you have rescue, swoop to an ally, and fly with them to a target location. So again, kind of abilities you need to play around with and see exactly. I like utility. I'd rather have utility over like a damage or a healing effect, because it makes, it can make, depending on what you're doing, it can make things more fun. However, I'm just kind of curious exactly what this will be used for. I could see maybe this being used for flag carriers, maybe in PvP or Mythic, something like that, to get somebody out of the way of something. Time Spiral, bend time allowing you and your allies to cast their major movement abilities once in the next 10 seconds, even if it is on cooldown. So a bit of a niche situational ability there. Soar launches you in the air, allows you to kind of fly around. You get Stalwart Ascent, flap upward, gaining height at the cost of some momentum, and Surge Forward, flap forward a short distance, gaining speed. And then, of course, just like Worgen, you have the takes you from human back to your dragon form. And that is pretty much everything. So I will show you what Soar does, because this is a pretty fun ability, I have to admit. So this is what you do. You just coast. You can flap up. And you can kind of rush forward. Kind of excited to use this in questing. Should make things a little bit easier. There was a pretty big emphasis on this in the Invoker starting zone, and then you just start to slowly descend to the ground. So there you go, folks. There are the abilities for Invoker Devastation. Hope you enjoyed that, and thank you for watching.